Good evening from St. Paul, Minnesota, site of the Republican National Convention. Tonight we want to focus on a topic that both presidential candidates have brought to center stage: service to America. But first, the hurricanes. Gustav has hit, and this is what it looked and sounded like as it came in. You are watching and listening to what it was like to be there, as captured by our cameraman Mark Laganga on the Louisiana coast. Behind Gustav, two more big storms heading for the U.S. East Coast. Gulf Coast residents quickly abandoned their homes after the evacuation order. In many cases, the only sign of life was the occasional animal left behind. Many of the levees in New Orleans were strained right up to the breaking point, only hours after the eye of Gustav had passed. To put this week of hurricanes into context and provide you perspective, our coverage focuses on the science, beginning with world-renowned hurricane expert Morris Bender.
I expected that it was going to weaken quite a bit when it went over Cuba. It weakened a bit more than I would have thought. It weakened more than our model forecasted. But our model did predict, as well as the other models, that it was going to significantly intensify in the Gulf, and it didn't. The hurricane went right over the loop current.
Morris Bender is never far away from his laptop, even on a holiday. Bender is a research meteorologist who works at the Geophysical Fluids Dynamic Laboratory at Princeton University, a multi-million-dollar government project where precise tracking of hurricanes has become a science.
Well, when you talk about a model, explain to the uninitiated, including myself, what you mean by a model. Is something you put together on a computer?
Exactly. Our model was specifically designed to be able to represent the hurricane structure. And it's actually one of the only models that are operational that can really detail the structure of a hurricane.
How accurate are we now at predicting where hurricanes are going to develop, where they're going to hit, what their intensity is going to be?
Well, over the last 10 years, our improvement in being able to predict the track of hurricanes has dramatically improved. And that's been a great breakthrough. Our model, as well as some of the other, what we call global models, have really been the main reason for that. Now, when you talk about a hurricane intensity, that is still the challenge. Though we seem to be starting to make progress in being able to predict hurricane intensity. But that's a very difficult thing because so many factors can affect a hurricane intensity.
Using the Princeton scientist model, they were amazingly accurate in predicting Gustav. What was a disorganized storm system over Haiti just a few days ago was accurately predicted to within a few miles of its actual impact point.
As far as the track, our model did very well. It predicted 4 days in advance, 5 days in advance, that the hurricane was going to hit Monday morning in eastern Louisiana. And that, I think, is a great progress, that 5 days before, the model was able to pretty much pinpoint eastern Louisiana on Monday morning.
Mr. Rockney, how are things over in the radar room?
On radio and then television, this reporter has been covering hurricanes for more than half a century. The first TV storm for me was Hurricane Carla that hit near Galveston, Texas in 1961. Besides being one of the largest hurricanes on record, Carla has another distinction.
Mr. Rockney, can we move into the radar room now?
It was the first to be tracked by radar images that were broadcast live on television. Because of the advanced warning, more than 500,000 people fled the storm, a record peacetime evacuation then. As a result, fewer than 50 people died.
These are by far the calmest people in a flood I've ever seen.
The local television station played a famous Ray Charles tune from the time.
I grew up in hurricane country in the Texas coast. Seems to me, even certainly as late as the late 1940s, if not indeed the early 50s, we didn't have the technology we have now, that it was pretty much put your finger to the wind and take into account what grandmother told you about the hurricanes and make a guess.
In the 60s, the first hurricane model, or the, again, computer model of the weather that's specifically used for hurricanes was developed. That actually was to provide 2-day forecasts. And Then as the years progressed, the models began to improve. Our model became operational in the mid-90s. At that time, the forecasts were extended to 3 days. And in those days, to get a 3-day forecast with 300-mile error was considered pretty good. Now the error is virtually cut in half for a 3-day forecast. And that's really a revolutionary improvement.
But in the years since Hurricane Carla, there's a new factor making the job of predicting future hurricanes more difficult. It's global warming. While some scientists think there will be no effect, others say rising temperatures will make hurricanes worse, but differ on exactly how.
Global warming is a fact. The Earth's climate has warmed over the last 150 years. There's no real dispute over that anymore in the scientific community. It's more difficult to say what the cause of the global warming is.
We talked to climate scientist Tom Knutson at his New Jersey home on the eve of Hurricane Gustav's landfall.
Right, so it's taken as scientific fact that over the last 140 to 50 years that we have had global warming. Where the argument comes is what caused it. Is it believed in the scientific community? Yes, humans have contributed to this, but there's argument over how much they've contributed to it. That's where the basic argument is.
I think that's right, that the devil is in the details. And when you have a warming, it's possible that there are multiple factors contributing to it. For example, the rapid warming in the early 20th century may have had contributions from both greenhouse gas emissions and perhaps even solar variability. And we also have another joker in the deck, which is internal climate variability. Now, what do I mean by that? That's how much the climate system can sort of bounce around on its own. If nothing were changing, if greenhouse gases were not changing, if the sun was not changing, the climate system would still vary a bit on its own just due to the interaction between ocean currents and ice sheets and atmospheric processes and what have you. The question is how much? Is that enough to explain this entire 140 years of warming? We don't think so. This warming over the last century sort of sticks out. Some scientists have termed it the hockey stick, that you have the things going along fairly smoothly for 900 years and then boop, at the end you have this uptick. The last 100 years or so has been very unusual, and we're now...
The upturn of the hockey stick, so to speak.
That's right, and it's one of the sort of smoking guns that we're seeing in the climate change community.
Knutson is a government specialist on global warming who now studies how that phenomenon is affecting the strength and frequency of hurricane activity.
What do we know about the relationship of global warming, global climate change, and hurricanes?
Well, that's a much more uncertain area than global temperature. So, as I mentioned before, we're very confident now that humans have contributed substantially to global warming. But the link between hurricanes and climate change is the science is at an earlier stage at this point. What we're finding from our own research is that when you take a climate model and simulate hurricane activity in it, and then you simulate again this activity but in a warmer climate version of the same model, we find that the hurricanes can become more intense in the warmer climate. However, when we look in the Atlantic Basin, for example, in terms of numbers of storms, we actually simulate fewer storms, fewer hurricanes in the warmer climate.
So to someone such as a reporter like myself who says, well, we know we have global warming and global warming is causing more hurricanes, fair or unfair to say, well, you may think that, but that's not, at least not yet, a scientific fact.
That's right, because if global warming caused hurricane activity to become much greater in terms of numbers of storms, then we should be able to see some evidence for an increase in hurricane counts and an increase in tropical storms when we go back to the historical data. And if you just look at the existing record and just plot it over time, you'll notice that there's an increase in tropical storms over time. And interestingly, if you take that, that curve of tropical storms and you overlay a curve of sea surface temperature, they both seem to be wiggling around and going up over time. So in a way, at face value, that looks rather alarming, because that's saying, well, sea surface temperatures are going up, tropical storms seem to be going up right in tandem, and we're projecting much larger warming for the 21st century, so that implies that we could have a very large increase in numbers of tropical storms. That's what you get when you start this analysis. However, one has to consider whether that record of tropical storms is complete or not, because now we know if there's this tropical storm going on in the Atlantic, we know about it because we have these great satellite images that we can see the whole basin very clearly. But the satellites came into the picture in the mid-1960s. Before that, no satellite data. Now there was aircraft reconnaissance from about the mid-1940s on, but prior to the mid-1940s, no regular aircraft reconnaissance in the Atlantic. But if a storm never makes landfall, then in order to be detected and be part of the database of storms, then some ship had to encounter this storm and then report that they'd observed these tropical storm force or hurricane force winds. Then we estimate that there were storms that were never seen, or likely were. So we make an educated guess as to how many of these missing storms there are. After we make this adjustment using this educated guess approach, we no longer have this rising trend in tropical storms. It's relatively flat.
All right, that's the frequency of hurricanes. Now, on the intensity of the hurricanes, so someone who says, it's pretty clear to me that these hurricanes we're getting, we tend to get bigger, fiercer hurricanes than we've ever had before. What does the scientific information, limited as it is, still working on it, tell us about the intensity of hurricanes?
Both the models and the theory indicate that in a warmer climate, you have this potential to have stronger storms than you do in the present day climate. But I'm being sort of vague about, I'm just saying stronger storms. The key question is how much stronger. So our estimate from our model is that for each 1 degree Celsius rise of tropical sea surface temperature that you would get with global warming, that hurricane intensities would go up about 4% roughly. For example, some models are projecting roughly 2 degrees Celsius increase of tropical Atlantic sea surface temperatures over the next century. So that would translate into about 8% increase of hurricane winds. So that's not trivial. It's not a huge increase, but I think that 8%, if it did happen, would be enough to be of importance.
Well, when it comes to global warming, what should we be asking, what should we be most concerned about?
Global warming means more than just global mean temperature. This global warming will have impacts on things like drought. It will have impacts on heat wave occurrence, possibly even on hurricanes. This is not it's not a simple problem, it's a very broad problem, and there are a lot of interesting and important aspects to it. And I think that the science is going to have to deal with this complexity to try to give policymakers and the public the best possible information that we can about where we're heading with this, what is essentially an experiment. And it's an unintentional experiment that we're doing with Earth's climate.
And no city sits more precariously at the intersection between global warming and national policy than New Orleans. Much of the Crescent City is below sea level, protected by levees. So rising oceans are a very real threat. And of course, there's the prospect of even fiercer hurricanes. We recently marked the 3-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a storm that took over 1,000 lives. But lost in the death and destruction of Katrina was the reality that the storm that did so much damage wasn't all that strong in New Orleans, and that this great disaster was largely man-made. Wall Street Journal reporter Christopher Cooper says government's response to Katrina is a national disgrace, a story he documented in the critically acclaimed book, Disaster: Hurricane Katrina and the Failure of Homeland Security.
They will tell you that Hurricane Katrina was the storm of the century and nothing's ever happened like it, and it devastated 90,000 square miles of countryside. But the fact is, it was a fairly standard hurricane. There was no reason for that flood wall to fall down under those conditions.
Cooper lived in New Orleans for 12 years and is a fierce critic of the nation's preparedness for a natural disaster.
The most shocking thing was how Washington went so dark when all this happened. This is a disaster that approaches at a relative trot. It's 15 miles an hour. It comes over a period of days. And to see the total lack of preparation. They had nobody in the city of New Orleans when the hurricane hit, so nobody knew that the flood walls had fallen down. The locals kept telling them the flood walls fell down, and they kept saying, well, I don't know. I'm watching cable TV, and people are walking around on Bourbon Street, and it looks fine to us.
Cooper says the Department of Homeland Security, founded in the wake of 9/11, made the government's response to natural disasters more bureaucratic, and that the failures of that bureaucracy were on display during Katrina.
Washington is not as interested in natural disasters as they used to be. They like terrorism. They think that's sexier. It's more fun to pursue, bearded fundamentalists than it is to prepare for a run-of-the-mill flood or a forest fire or a hurricane. Most disasters are going to be natural disasters. They're not going to be terrorist attacks. New Orleans is not any more vulnerable to disaster than any other city. In the pantheon of disasters, a hurricane is sort of an average threat, and when an earthquake hits, or a fire breaks out, or there's a chemical spill, where is the federal government going to be?
Responding to these disasters is the job of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. It had been a cabinet-level post, but it's now part of the Homeland Security flowchart. And Cooper says that's a problem.
FEMA is still the cronied-up agency that it always was. It still lacks for resources. It's the janitor of the Department of Homeland Security. It's often overlooked at budget time. They still have a very bad tracking system. They can't tell where a lot of their goods are at any given time. Where is the truck full of cots and medical supplies? They're not quite sure. So that hadn't changed. What has changed is that FEMA has sort of divorced itself from some of this kind of planning and allowed the locals to do it. So FEMA now views itself more as a housing agency. This time they're going to be better at providing the mobile homes and trailers people need to live in while their houses are being repaired.
And when this year's hurricane season hit, FEMA knew it had to be better prepared than the last time.
They've taken the right steps at the beginning. They have pre-positioned the supplies that they may need. They have a cadre of people from FEMA sitting in downtown New Orleans to let them know firsthand if the place is flooding. They didn't have that last time.
And it's not just FEMA that has changed. President Bush, who was criticized heavily for being disengaged during Katrina, was conspicuously on duty during Gustav. And in the years since Katrina, the Army Corps of Engineers has been busy rebuilding the levees protecting New Orleans. But they haven't finished the job. While Hurricane Gustav may not have caused the damage some feared, other storms are just around the corner, some which could easily present new peril for the still vulnerable city.
These levees are no different than the highways that you're riding on. There's nobody in America who thinks that the roads are in better shape now than they were 10 years ago. Our infrastructure is decrepit, and those levees are just as decrepit. It will take years to rebuild them. If a hurricane comes while that rebuilding is going on and flattens them again, that's really going to be the end of the city. Nobody can live their life this way. You can't suddenly yank your kid out of school and quit your job and go live for 3 weeks in a hotel room in Tennessee. 2 hits, and people start thinking, this is going to happen every couple of years. How can I do my job? How can I conduct business here. And it's one of those things that you're not going to feel that bad about until it's gone. And then you'll realize what sort of contribution a place like that gives to the United States.
When we return, the politics of national service that both presidential candidates are talking about.
Serving your country has long been one of our democracy's greatest strengths. It's often first associated with military service, but millions of Americans answer the call every day here and around the world, and many of them do it for free. Senator John McCain's record of service and sacrifice is well known. He famously served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War, where he was imprisoned for 5 long years as a prisoner of war. Senator Barack Obama's service was very different in nature, but he too has campaigned on his years as a community activist in Chicago as a rationale for his candidacy. Not only have Obama and McCain talked about their personal service, they have also focused on how a call to service would be a centerpiece of their administrations. That's because the number of Americans answering the call is down, while the need has never been greater.
America, now is not the time for small plans.
Senator Barack Obama invoked public service in his acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention in Denver.
And we will keep our promise to every young American. If you commit to serving your community or our country, we will make sure you can afford a college education.
Thank you very much.
And John McCain's words on the campaign trail have been just as strong.
I want Americans to serve. I want to provide Americans a way to serve. I want to expand the Peace Corps. I want to expand AmeriCorps. I want to expand the Marine Corps and the Army.
John McCain and Barack Obama say all the right things about public service. They talk about their own biographies of service.
We sat down with New York University professor Paul Light for a conversation about public service. And nobody has thought more about the subject than he has. In fact, he has the only endowed professorship in public service in the country. He's written 18 books, lauded by Democrats and Republicans alike. And he thinks the conventional wisdom about public service is all wrong.
The standard view of volunteering is that Americans need to be pushed a little bit more, asked to sacrifice a little bit more, and that if you just call them to public service, they will come. But the reality is that many, many Americans want to serve. After September 11th, there was this huge surge in the number of Americans who said they were going to volunteer. Huge numbers. To the point where we were all shocked, those of us who study this. This was a great moment in contemporary history, but the volunteering never occurred. So what we believe is that calls to volunteering are not enough. You've got to give them specific opportunities. You've got to give them specific tasks. It can't be just another flowery call to help your country.
You're going to have to spend some time in community service or national service, work in a homeless shelter, join the Peace Corps. We'll invest in you, you invest in America. Together, we will march this country forward.
Obama and McCain don't get specific about what they'll do to make government better as a destination for young people. They don't get specific about how to help charities use their volunteers wisely. So what you have is a general call to public service, but you don't get the specifics that will make it easier for Americans to say, yes, I want to serve, and I'm going to march right down and volunteer for this charity or that charity.
The one thing both candidates have gotten specific about is expanding AmeriCorps. That's a federal program sending 75,000 volunteers each year to live and work in underserved communities. But Professor Light says just calling for an increase in numbers isn't being specific enough.
So Obama wants to raise that number to 250,000. McCain would like to raise that number to somewhere in between. Both are quite clear that AmeriCorps is important, but neither of them talk about creating conditions under which people will want to join AmeriCorps. The tuition benefit hasn't been raised in 15 years. The living stipend hasn't been raised. Don't get me wrong, I mean, we want Americans to sacrifice, but if we make the sacrifice too great, then you don't get people lining up to actually engage in public service.
We have to provide the benefits and the incentives for young Americans to serve.
Even though the two candidates overlap in some of their calls to service, they have very different philosophies. And Professor Light says McCain's comes from a long Republican tradition, emphasizing patriotic obligation.
This country is still the greatest nation in the world. Our best days are ahead of us, but we got some challenges.
McCain's notion that we owe something to our country. It's owed, it's an obligation, it's a civic duty. Obama uses that language too, but it's harnessed to a change strategy, to a goal for change. You need to serve your country so that we deal with climate change. You need to serve your country so that we deal with poverty or the lack of health insurance. Get involved politically. You don't hear McCain saying that very much.
We've got to appeal to young Americans' patriotism to serve and to remain in the military.
He's not promoting public service toward a particular policy goal. He's promoting public service as a pure public good.
Hey guys.
Obama styles himself on a John F. Kennedy kind of public service. He does argue in favor of a new agency in the federal government to promote public service.
How are you?
McCain won't do that. McCain does not want more government, and conservatives do not want more government involvement in promoting public service through dollars.
Republicans prefer public-private partnerships, like George W. Bush's faith-based initiatives and his father's 1,000 Points of Light.
All right.
They also see a role for big business. Here, a group from the company L'Oreal boxes groceries at a New York City food bank to send out to food pantries to help the needy. It's a volunteer day, a popular trend in corporate charity. While businesses play an important role, Professor Light says they can have motives other than providing pure public service.
You don't know how much of that public service is real and how much of that is really designed to create a marketing angle to get young people to contribute funds through the purchase of products.
Professor Light says another problem with volunteerism today is that too often it's just about chipping in when time permits.
Bye-bye, have a nice day.
Getting up on a Saturday morning and getting out and doing something, that's always useful to a point, but charities are leery about it. I mean, how much can you invest in a volunteer who's only going to show up once? The volunteer hours may be there, but they may not be the quality hours that a charity can really use to get something done where you need a fair amount of sophistication.
Notions of public service stretch to the very formation of the American Republic. The Continental Army during the Revolutionary War relied on volunteers for everything from feeding and housing the troops to caring for the wounded.
The founders believed in an activated citizenry that would provide for the needy. And we relied on volunteering and charitable organizations for a century and a half to deliver services to the needy.
For most of American history, there was no government safety net for the poor, the sick, and the elderly, so responsibility fell to private charity. That changed with the New Deal government programs of the 1930s.
The modern history of calls for public service by presidents started with the Great Depression. We had this huge unemployment rate. Civilian public service was seen as a way to take care of the unemployed by giving them federally sponsored jobs. So that's where the Works Progress Administration came from. That's where the Civilian Conservation Corps came from.
Full-time federal service programs continued after the Depression. decade by decade reflecting the needs of the times. In the 1940s, the GI Bill paid for World War II veterans to go to college.
We favored public service during the 1950s in terms of educating scientists and engineers to deal with the Soviet Union's ascension and the space race.
The fact that you're willing to do this for our country.
And then we had the Peace Corps under John F. Kennedy in response to the idea that you should ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And since then, we've had public service programs and calls to public service in every administration.
And with both candidates now talking about public service, that tradition will continue. But what will come of these most recent calls to serve remains uncertain.
If I had one piece of advice for Obama and McCain, it's to make public service real. Don't talk about the need for people to serve without giving them options. If they just say, hey, we need you to go out there and volunteer, do good for your community without specifics, they're wasting their breath.
When we return, why the Twin Cities are considered the volunteer capital of the United States. So stick here with us. Finally tonight, we conclude our look at service right here in Minnesota with a look at volunteerism. And it's fitting that we're here because according to a federal study, the Twin Cities are the volunteer capital of the nation. In no other metropolitan area do the residents volunteer as much as they do here. You'll see tonight that volunteering takes many forms and it's a quintessential part of the American experience.
Let's go, one more, reset, let's go. Hustle back to the line, let's go, gentlemen. Too much walking going on. Let's go.
It's Monday night football practice in a Minneapolis park.
Drive them through.
It's a scene happening all across America.
Fight him back, fight him back, fight him back. Nice job, Jack.
Kids are hitting the field, and on the sidelines calling the plays are their volunteer coaches.
Short, choppy steps once you get into the drive stage.
Greg Barsness has been coaching youth football in Armitage Park in East Minneapolis for 6 years.
Down, set, hut.
And even though his own sons have outgrown the program, he still gives anywhere from 10 to 40 hours a week to these kids.
You will learn more than you can ever teach, and the rewards come to you in ways that you'll never anticipate and are so valuable to you. This is a labor of love.
Okay, bring it in here right now, real quick, let's go.
Coach Barsness says without parent volunteers like him, this community football program probably wouldn't exist.
Even if you could find somebody to pay to do it, there's not those people out there to teach youngsters.
Nice job, little energy on those last 6. Go get a drink of water and we'll start working on pulling. Let's go.
Big thing for us here with football is teaching these kids teamwork. And you know, when they're older, blocking, tackling, that won't mean anything to them. But anything that we can teach them about teamwork, sportsmanship, discipline, that's going to come in handy down the road.
Barsness and thousands of parents like him spend hours each week coaching their kids' sports programs without thinking too much about it.
Blockers, get down in your stance. We're going left on one. Down.
Donating time like this is just common practice around the United States. But volunteering is particularly popular in this part of the country.
Minnesota and the whole upper Midwest has one of the highest rates of volunteering, and this has been true for a long time.
Psychology professor Mark Snyder studies volunteerism at the University of Minnesota. He says volunteering for everything from coaching kids in football, to sprucing up community parks and gardens, to caring for the sick, has a long history. One that dates back to a time when neighbors had to band together to survive the rugged conditions of early frontier settlements.
No one on their own could build a barn, but if neighbors helped each other build barns, then everyone had barns. And from that came the traditions of volunteer firefighting, volunteer police, volunteer schools, volunteer libraries, and the whole volunteer movement came out of that.
Minneapolis-St. Paul earned its title as the volunteer capital of America because almost 40% of the residents volunteer their time. The national average is 26%.
Many people believe the society as we know it simply would not work without volunteers, that so many of the things that we value, the services that are not being provided publicly but get provided privately by volunteers, are essential to make society work.
God bless you, man. Okay.
An example can be found in a group of volunteers in Minneapolis that have taken the idea of a neighborhood watch citywide. These men are stepping in for beat police officers who were reassigned after budget cuts 5 years ago.
My name is V.J. Smith, V like in victory, J like in Jesus. And what I do is get out in the community and impact our young people, our seniors, impact this community in a positive way. Amen. All right.
V.J. Smith and his group Mad Dads are on the front lines in the city's most violent and gang-plagued areas. Mad Dads park their converted ambulance on city streets and use loud music, brightly colored signs designed to catch the attention of the passing traffic,
Sit down. You want a Bible?
and old-fashioned evangelism to reclaim street corners lost to drug dealers, gang members, and prostitutes.
You know you want one. All right, man. Hey, man, I love you, man. We're not the police. We don't have guns, but we can solve some crimes, and our biggest goal is to prevent all the crimes that we can.
These streets were once filled with Minneapolis police officers who were part of a federal program called COPS, or Community-Oriented Policing Services. They walked a beat, got to know the neighborhoods, but the multi-billion-dollar program that supported the officers was slashed by the Bush administration, which said millions were being spent improperly. And without federal money, cops on the street were reassigned back to their patrol cars. Now, they're sorely missed in violent neighborhoods like this one, in the heart of blood street gang turf in South Minneapolis.
This is what we do on the streets. See, this is why we come out on the streets to do this right here.
Many, like new business owner Reginald Hunter, say Mad Dad's boisterous presence is a fine substitute for uniformed police.
Don't get me wrong. Police presence is needed or it'd be mayhem. But you look at this, how folks are just honking their horns and walking by. Police should be doing the same thing, but it should say Minneapolis Police Department on the side. You know, folks don't know the cops' names. The cops don't walk around and introduce themselves when a new business just opens up. They don't do that. So it's not like, you know, it's kind of like a wall there, but yet, you know, if you call 911, they're gonna come.
Mad Dads believe that being a loud and conspicuous presence will drive away criminals and make residents trapped in their homes feel safe enough to come out. Exactly the idea behind the community police that were reassigned. There are now more than 50 Mad Dad volunteers who fan out across the city several nights each week.
Neighbors begin to release their guards and let their guards down a little bit because they know that they've heard of Mad Dads and they're excited that we're there.
Smith founded the Minneapolis chapter of Mad Dads about 10 years ago. It was his way of confronting a surge in homicides in Minneapolis that peaked at nearly 100 in 1995, a higher per capita murder rate than New York City. That led to the nickname Murderapolis.
I started Mad Dads because I seen that in order for me to make a change, I had to get off my rusty dusty and do something about it. And that's what I began to do. And I realized that I had so much experience of being on the streets that I could do more on the streets than I could anywhere else. In places in this community where people have just lost hope, we provide that. That's something that the police don't have time to do.
At least not anymore. The COPS program had allowed departments all over the country to hire officers that would address minor quality of life problems, such as litter and aggressive panhandling, that added up to create a sense of lawlessness, a feeling that many say became a magnet for more serious crimes.
I've lost 3 kids to gun violence on the streets.
Laverne Jones is one of those who lost hope, and she lost her family. 3 of her children were gunned down on the streets. She says she rarely saw police in her South Minneapolis neighborhood except when they were making an arrest. Understandably, she moved away, abandoning the area to the young men who killed her 3 children. Laverne Jones, like many others, says police have done the same.
They need to be out of the cars, and they need to mingle with the people that lives in the neighborhood, and they need to not harass them and get to know them and find out who is who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. They think everybody is the bad guy, you know, and if they did get out the cars and mingle with the people, they would know who is who.
I mean, ideally, everybody would like to know the police officer on the corner.
Dennis Cusick, who runs the Upper Midwest Community Policing Institute, agrees with Laverne Jones.
Knowing who their officer is, knowing that they can call and leave a voicemail for them, knowing that there's a personal face with a name that they can call my officer, I think it really addresses the bridge and gives us a wonderful way to police today.
His institute was founded with federal COPS money, and even after the cutbacks, it still trains police departments in community crime prevention techniques. Cusick says neighborhoods have suffered without community police trained in his program.
I think a lot of the blessings we see today, like the program Mad Dads or other programs in Minneapolis particularly, they really got their start through this funding, and they're continuing to flourish because they have found ways to independently sustain the good work that they're doing.
I mean, obviously, I would say a crime prevented is better than a crime solved any day.
Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan says he wishes he had more beat cops to help the volunteers on the streets.
I mean, most cities will tell you that beat officers are our biggest reason for their success in preventing crime. So we lost that. So in essence, we were responding to 911 calls, and we were in a reactive mode. We need help from all places. So organizations like Mad Dads, those things started forming also to help assist law enforcement with that visibility and that presence. And they continue today.
Yeah, Mad Dad's in the house. Hit your horn one time for Mad Dad. All right, hit that horn, that's right. Making a difference in the neighborhood.
But there's a big difference between Mad Dads and police. These men are armed with little more than signs, music, and a message.
A lot of these kids, man, aren't that bad. It's those that are just swayed in the wrong direction and need some love. And that word is not something that the police say very often is, I love you, or I want to love you, because that's just not the way they're geared up. And that's where we come in. What's up, brother? How you doing?
Smith took us to what he says is a success for the Mad Dads program. For years, this shop owner named Samir felt helpless. His convenience store was overrun with gang members, and police only came when shots were fired. But Mad Dads made Samir's shop a regular stop on their circuit, and many of the young men who had scared away shoppers found themselves out on the street.
So it's been a tremendous change on the corner. Our business is growing, you know. So when it's safer out here, the businesses also benefit. And it's safer, and people feel more safe, and they shop more, and they keep the money in the neighborhood.
Good.
This is the best I've seen it.
But V.J. Smith acknowledges his limits. Some gang members refuse to leave the corner outside the store, despite Mad Dad's regular visits. So Smith used his credibility with the police department to enlist regular police patrols of the corner. As a result, business is now thriving.
Gotta give credit to the City of Minneapolis Police and to the community organizers and the neighborhoods, because they both work hand in hand. You can't clap with one hand.
All right, bro, I'll see you later. Let's roll, man.
Working hand in hand, volunteers and the government. It's a collaboration you'll find in Minneapolis and around the country. Many social services that receive tax dollars couldn't function without volunteers.
Loving the teamwork.
And that's the case at the downtown Minneapolis shelter called People Serving People. The county pays the shelter to house and feed homeless families, but every other service the shelter provides comes from private funding or volunteers.
Have you done this before?
No, my
You
first
haven't?
day.
All right, welcome. It's so rewarding when we serve dinner here, and there's a high percentage of children, and we always get thank yous.
Joseph Lusso is one of those stepping up. On the evening we visited the shelter, he was serving dinner to the residents.
Here's our dinner rush.
Lusso and fellow volunteers at the shelter have logged more than 30,000 hours this year, almost double the number in 2005. The reason? More need. Foreclosures in the Twin Cities have hurt landlords, and families like these, who are renting from them, are suddenly forced out and into the care of shelters and volunteers like Joe Russo.
All right, let's get a couple ahead here. As a project leader for People Serving People, I organize the group for the supper. So I'm here typically every third Tuesday. Okay, you want a double scoop? Yes. Okay. I love volunteering. To me, I look at it as an exchange. You know, someday I might need that help. You know, maybe a tornado is going to hit my house or something, God forbid, but yeah, I look at it completely in exchange. It's very rewarding to be able to help people. Hello. How are you? Good.
Lusso himself is between jobs. He may be part of a new trend of unemployed volunteers, according to the University of Minnesota professor Mark Snyder.
I did research by just going on the web and doing some searches, and I found lots and lots of calls for volunteering that were related to problems associated with the downturn in the economy. I also found websites offering advice to people who lost their job because of the economic downturn. Consider doing some volunteer work, because volunteer work can not only help pass the time, but can also help you get your foot in the door at a place where you might ultimately like to work.
It's just one of many new volunteering trends Professor Snyder is noticing.
If you go back to the 1950s, there was a lot more volunteering by women than by men. The gender gap's been disappearing, but it's not been because of women volunteering less as they've gone into the world of work. It's actually been men volunteering more, perhaps because they saw the example of women going to work and still volunteering, and men said, if women can work and volunteer, we men can work and volunteer too. And that was the beginning of the end of the gender gap in volunteering.
Another national trend in volunteering: corporations encouraging their employees to get involved in their communities and to do it on company time. That's the case here.
Who wants to hang these? Kirsten?
78% of food giant General Mills employees volunteer. On this Wednesday afternoon, one department is helping Habitat for Humanity build a 5-unit townhome in northeast Minneapolis.
This is our 18th Habitat home that we're building. This summer we have close to 800 volunteers out on different shifts building this home, working with Habitat for Humanity.
Ellen Goldberg-Luger heads the charitable giving and volunteer programs for General Mills.
I think in terms of employee volunteerism and payback, there's a huge reward for employees in terms of satisfaction and feeling that they're working for a company that is deeply committed to the community. I got you. All right, thank you. Yep. So employees gain skills from volunteerism, but also gain a sense of fulfillment that their company is really committed to volunteering.
General Mills and Habitat for Humanity have a long history stretching back 17 years. But that's nothing new here. Long relationships between big corporations and nonprofits are common in the Twin Cities. Companies are all but expected to commit significant resources and money to the community. Other Twin Cities-based companies like 3M and Target have programs similar to General Mills that donate money and encourage their employees to get involved.
Thank you.
At the Minneapolis Crisis Nursery, Target employees serve lunch to children.
Oh, this is awesome. You know what? One thing that's really cool is that Target doesn't just say that they're in the community. They actually let us come out here and do this. They reimburse us for the food and parking expense, and you know, we're on the clock, and so it's great. They do it and they let us do it. It's fun. You guys are making sure I get all my vegetables today, aren't you?
Yep. 84% of people surveyed say that they would much rather purchase from a store or purchase a brand where they know that the company gives back to the community.
Kristen Shura is the director of Hands on Twin Cities, an organization that matches volunteers with organizations in need.
What I've actually heard from a lot of corporate recruiters is that new employees coming into the workforce, they will choose a job with a company that has a strong sense of civic engagement versus a company that doesn't. They want to work for a company that has those values.
General Mills employ and volunteer Kirsten Lamoureux said that was true for her.
Oh, definitely. I was in the military for 5 years, and that was one of the primary reasons why I picked General Mills over some other companies was their Community Action Center and their volunteer program.
There's a lot of fascinating research that suggests that people who volunteer are healthier than those who don't. Their psychological health and their physical health improves. And there's even indications that people who volunteer live a longer life. So there are tremendous benefits to those who volunteer, benefits to those who receive volunteering, and to the community at large, the ties that volunteering builds.
The Twin Cities, volunteer capital of America. As we've tried to underscore tonight, service to one's country and community can take many forms. Such service, whatever form it may take, should not be underestimated in terms of the benefits and contributions it makes. Among others, there are contributions to the giver's sense of satisfaction and personal growth, the feeling of being bigger, more important than oneself, and what such service ultimately contributes to our national identity. National service, whether it be military or otherwise, is one of the requirements of true patriotism, and especially in a country such as ours, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and multi-racial. It is a part of what holds us together, keeps us united with a shared sense of national purpose. For HDNet, tonight from St. Paul, Minnesota and the Republican National Convention, Dan Rather reporting. Good night. If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.